Welcome, friends. My name is Walter Hjelt Sullivan. I'm the Director of Quaker Affairs at Haverford College, and I'm a member of the Executive Committee and also the Planning Committee for this program. I'm really excited to welcome you to our event tonight. We are going to be focusing on supporting vocation, helping students navigate a neoliberal culture. And I'm really excited that our presenters are going to help us think about how it is that we support students and support ourselves and support others in living a life that's really grounded in our deepest values and visions. First, we're going to hear from Jen and Greg for a period of time, 20 minutes or so. And then they are going to teach us a process of peer support that's done in groups of 3. And after they teach us how to do that, we are going to go into small groups and we're going to actually practice. And we'll then give you a time after you've each had a chance to practice to create some questions or some observations that you'd like to share. And we'll ask you to identify one person in your small group who's going to bring those observations or questions and put them in the chat. And then we'll end for a 30-minute session or something like that of conversation and exploration based on those observations and comments and questions. I'm really excited to introduce to you Jen Higgins Newman and Greg Woods, our presenters. Jen is the program director at Beacon Hill Friends Meeting. She has a master's of theological studies from Vanderbilt Divinity School. And Greg is a program consultant also at Beacon Hill Friends House. That's where they work together to design this program. But Greg has a master's of divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary. At some point offline, you could ask them, like, what's the difference between theological studies and master in divinity and a theological seminary and a divinity school? All of that to be determined later. Thank you so much, Jen and Greg, for being here. And now I'll pass it on to the two of you to lead us forward.
Great. Thanks, Walter. And Matt is going to spotlight Greg and I so that you all can see us very prominently. Here we are. It's so good to be with all of you. I'll also say that I'm also an alumna of George Fox University, so that's where I did my undergrad, and then went on to Vanderbilt Divinity School. And I'll also say that the Friends House, so I'm the program director for Beacon Hill Friends House, which is a Quaker center for learning and action. So we run public programs as well as a residential community that lives according to Quaker values. And we've been this residential community since 1957. And it's an interfaith community that lives according to Quaker values. And we often have students or people in transition. You can live here up to 4 years. And so for our residents, but also at our public programs, we're often a bridge between communicating about Quakerism and Quaker values and principles and practices of Friends to a non-Quaker audience. And I think that's where this curriculum that Greg and I are working to develop really will be useful to students who are at Quaker colleges in the same way that it's useful to our residents here at the Friends House. I think that Quakerism has a lot to offer, but it is a difficult task on its own to communicate Quaker principles and practices outside of people who either grew up in Quakerism or who are members of meetings. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Can everyone see that okay? great. Perfect. So our presentation is called Supporting Vocation, Helping Students Navigate a Neoliberal Culture. And it's based on a curriculum for a retreat or workshop, set of workshops that Greg and I have been workshopping that will fit in sort of whatever time set that we have to encourage, as Walter said, that sort of peer support or community building amongst participants to help guide people in their own discernment of what they're called to be in the world. And we'll define some of these terms for you throughout our presentation. So don't worry if you're like, what is vocation? I don't know. Or what do they mean by that? We'll get to that. And so I'll turn it to, so this is a picture on the slide of one of our hybrid vocational discernment retreats. There are several Friends House residents, some local grad students, some folks from Friends meeting at Cambridge, which is the largest meeting in our area. And all of whom are young adults under the age of 30, I believe, or around there. So you can see that we have some folks who are participating on Zoom and some folks in person. This is our new reality. And it also, shows the community that we're able to create in the container. A lot of these folks didn't know each other. So although we have some people who are residents, there was sort of intermingling between people. So why vocational discernment matters for today's students? So students are in this neoliberal culture, this capitalist culture that asks us to act in our own economic self-interest, that asks us to have a job that produces output, that also doesn't give you the kinds of benefits that maybe traditional jobs gave, and the landscape of what work looks like, where you work, how you work is changing. We also know that young adults are asking sort of challenging questions about the nature of work. They're asking, and we are asking deep questions about who we are, what our values are, and how we might live in alignment with them, about where our gifts and skills meet real needs in the world. We're asking hard questions like, to what end is our labor? And considering what we're putting out into the world in addition to what we gain from employment. What does my employer do in the world? What values do they have? What is my work helping produce? And is that thing in alignment with my values? What am I in service of? And so with these questions in the mix, I think it's important to take vocation, or thinking about what students' right next steps are as they approach ending college, really holistically as the whole person, not just sort of what's their next step in terms of what jobs are they applying for, what internships do they have, what does their LinkedIn bio say, which career service offices I think do very well. But what are their values, and how might they ask the right questions of themselves now and into the future? So I'll turn this over to Greg.
Yeah, in this curriculum, we wanted to start at a place about it, not about what you are doing, but who you are and who you want to be. Only in my career for working for Quakers, I worked in Washington, D.C. And the first question everyone asked you in D.C. at parties were like, what do you do? Like, what do you want to do? Because a lot of young adults from career for climbing the career ladder. But we want to get out of that framework. Who do you want to be? And like, what kind of person do you want to go into being?
So what do we mean by the term vocation? So the term at its root comes from the Latin vocare, which means to call. So another term that you can use, that we might use, is the word calling. Now, in some circles, traditionally, the word calling can mean sort of a very specific religious process, like being called into a religious order or the Catholic priesthood. a set of specific things you need to do in order to be ordained, and then have another congregation call you there. But this term calling doesn't have to be rooted in a specific religious tradition. And in this curriculum, we have a more expansive view of what we mean by vocation and calling. So for us, it can be, what do I feel led by God or Spirit or the divine or your inward teacher? That's a question. What do you feel led by? What do you feel led to become? What do you feel like it's drawing you to? What is stirring in you right now that you want to put out into the world? And as we consider questions like, to what end is our labor, we can explore what we want our labor to be putting out into the world. And so it's a listening to sort of what is our inward teacher or God or the light of Christ. And we hold the language sort of as the participants want to fill in. We want to hold them where they are. And we want to give them a framework to continue asking that of themselves. And back to you, Greg.
This is illustrated by the lovely quote from the theologian and writer Benedict Butler. Your vocation in life is where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. And we really feel like, even though Frederick Butler isn't Quaker himself, it is one of the underlying quotes that we really feel that the curriculum is undercoated with. And even though we did a vocation, I've largely booked the word vocation and talked about vocation has been more in the Christian circles. There, I met with a Hindu advisor from Tufts University near Boston, talking about the curriculum. And she told me vocation is related to Dharma, or aligning with our right path for this timeline. And I think there is it was serendipitous because we were scheduled to meet to talk about a whole nother topic, but Tufts chaplains were already talking about this among themselves and talking about how the vocation looks from their different spiritual perspectives. So it is there is something that is already being taught a lot about in different communities. So what as Quakers can we offer? Can Jen and I offer the college student and young adults?
So one of the Quaker quotes that we explore in our curriculum is this one by George Fox. Let your lives preach, let your light shine. And the phrase, let your life speak, has become popular due to the book of Parker Palmer by the same title. And the roots of that, let your life speak, go back to this. When Greg and I were looking at this quote and sort of the context of this epistle, we thought that the term preach here was a little bit more powerful to us than the term speak. So I like to think about preaching, or the idea of offering a message, like a message in meeting for worship, as a little window into divine wisdom, the wisdom that's within us, but also transcendent to us. So not just about the story your life tells, or what picture your actions are painting, as in how I understand let your life speak. But how can our lives be a window into wisdom for ourselves and others? With our steps, how can we reveal who we are, the values we hold? And if the language of Christ and God speaks to you, how can our steps reveal God and reveal Christ to others? So when we think about this idea about sort of letting your life preach, Walter joked earlier, Greg and I both have theological and divinity, that sort of soup degree within the religious traditions, but these conversations can be relevant far outside of people who are having conversations in religion or theology departments, right? So I want to take a minute to look at some examples from my own life and conversations. One of my best friends is an organic chemist and finished a PhD in that. And she worked during her PhD to understand antibiotic resistance, which at the time, pre-pandemic, was like the idea that we might have a pandemic or an epidemic, I don't know quite the right word, around an antibiotic resistant bacteria. And so her work was very specific to this, but she really felt like, okay, my values are that I want to heal people. I want to be involved in that. And so this is my way of using my gifts of specific, analysis and organic chemistry, and where I feel led to explore. I also know someone who literally works on building bridges. I know someone who births children and brings life into the world, and another who works with people who have terminal illnesses. And when I have conversations with these people about how they got into their jobs, when we talk about then, to what end is your labor? They're often thinking about that as they're, sitting with people, or as they're working on a bridge to connect actual cities, versus me saying like we're a bridge between Quakerism and the rest of the world. So we can talk about these in different kinds of departments, different kinds of careers, but really examine how are our values being enacted through our work. How might our lives be preaching through our current employment or not? And how do we engage in these conversations in an ongoing way? So Greg, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, we feel that Quaker faith about practice and offer tools that equip both Quakers and non-Quakers with what they need to not only decide they call now, but to continue that discernment journey throughout their life, work, and overall ministry. And we use ministry in a more expansive meaning than like church-based ministry, but whether it, like what Jen was saying, like literally building bridges, but like helping them find out what God or the inner spirit or whatever college students define or don't define, whatever they feel called to do, and using that phrasing to speak about ministry in that context.
So as we think about helping then students, young adults, or any person who's engaging in vocational discernment, and we say that it's rooted in Quakerism, we root it in the assumption that there is that of God in everyone, and everyone has access to an inward teacher that can help guide them. And so, when we were talking about planning this session, imagine that many people who work in higher education get questions from students all the time. What should I do? And of course, you can offer them a list of things that are like, you could be this, you could be this, here are different paths different people take. You could do what I do. But in our work, and one thing I particularly appreciate about our curriculum is I'm 28 years old. I don't have all of the answers for every person, but I can help provide each person with the circumstances to be able to go inward and to think about that for themselves. And to know then how to learn how to ask those deep questions and sit with them in community, and what are the tools that we can do in this moment to sit with people in community, and what are things that they can do then later on. And so Greg and I aren't pretending to be experts in any field and able to tell people what they should do next, but really working to cultivate how can they access that inward teacher, that light of Christ, that divine wisdom within them. And that involves then responding to those kinds of questions a little bit differently. So, of course you can offer I could offer you these things. I'm curious, what you feel led to, or is there anything that you're feeling particularly drawn to, or have you sat with some people in community about this? And we can talk more about some specific tools momentarily. So actually we're going to now. So what we do, we think it's important to make space for students to explore their hearts, discern their own deepest questions. So we provide tools that help them craft their focus questions, that help them learn to center down. So in our, in our workshops and in our workbook, we provide students with sort of some very basic, here are some techniques for centering down, the same kinds of things, I'm using that term to sort of invite stillness into their life. It's the same kinds of things I would be working with people on if they asked me, what does it like to go to meeting for worship? But it's in a completely different context. Instead, it's learning to listen to their inner wisdom as they're discerning their vocation. We also think that it's important to invite community among the participants. So we're really creating a container for them to learn to ask other people deep questions and to listen to what the myriad voices in the room are sort of holding with them. And it nurtures their ability to hold ambiguity and navigate exploring questions. We all know that, I think we all know that people, we come in cycles with asking ourselves questions about what am I doing? I think no matter where you are, if you're a college student or you've been working for a long time. And so not just equipping students with here's the set of things you could be doing next, and here are the career trajectories for you, but learning and in any career, you might have moments where, or any work or any non-paid work that you might have moments where you don't know what your right next step is, or you're feeling stuck, but you don't know exactly what language to use. And so we want to equip people in this changing world where people might be changing jobs pretty significantly too, with the tools to hold that ambiguity and to discern what their next steps are. And I'll throw it to Greg.
Yeah, one of the great things about receiving a grant, because it lets help from others. So in this work, so Jen and I are putting together a workbook for our program, and we are getting it illustrated by the fabulous Quaker artist Joey Hartman Dow.
Yes, I can talk about the map just a little bit. The concept of this map, so when Greg and I did, we attended a few different vocational, Greg?
Did no one hear me?
No, you muted yourself.
Oh, sorry. So I will start over. One of the great things about having money.
I think we heard that part, Greg. I think we just didn't hear any explanation of what the map is and why we did it.
Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry. So Jen, early on when we were talking about this, Jen showed me a map that another organization does for their vocational retreats with young adults, and it was so good. I never that doesn't ever look like that. So because the path is not always linear or circular, we may repeat steps or skip steps. So starting at who am I, what am I seeking, what do I want to become, and that how to symbolize the question, who can I ask for help, who is in my corner, where do I want to be vocationally, physically, emotionally, and that may lead the person to go back to, okay, who is there, or who is like living where I want to be, or who is working in a place I want to work at, and what are my next steps, and then the future. But only map makers would put where there'll be dragons on maps to illustrate places that were unknown to them. And it was a warning about where not to go. And we will put that on a later iteration of the map. But we want to invite people to go into that unknown, because both Jen and I have went places where we didn't think we would go, and that changed our lives. And I think that is how we can help students to more fully live into their vocation, into their dreams, into their hopes for a world that they want to see.
As I move to the next slide, I'll also mention this is a draft. So Greg and I wanted to create a non-linear vocational discernment map, but not all of the pieces are there. So like Greg said, there's no here be dragons, but we're also working at how do we incorporate systemic barriers into this map and in what way? So if folks have feedback for us on that, we would be really interested. But to talk about the ways that things that we don't control, but the system in which we are a part, like that water that's there, the ways that impacts how we move through this map. But that's not quite as easily created.
They might be little dragons too on the map.
So Greg, I think this is still you.
So what does this ultimately accomplish? So what do we hope this accomplish? Provide students with skills they need to discern both their right next steps and into the future, and building lifelong skills, and creating environments for students to feel supported and community, and also confidence to trust the inner light of the inner teacher. And we also talked about things that they can do after their workshops, after the workshop, to continue the discernment process. like spiritual companionship, to help them to have ways to continue walking with others along their journey so they don't feel alone. Hopefully it could be other people in the workshop or other people in the local area, but with Zoom, they can happen in the with people from across the world connecting, and teaching students about Quaker concept and practices outside of a meeting context or a meeting for worship context, or even a Quaker education context. We hope the workshops will draw people who are Quaker or who had never been to a Quaker event, because it is, we are talking about something that is of a wider interest than people who are usually attracted to Quakerism. But we still hope to teach them about Quaker concept and practices that helps them throughout their lives.
So now I think we're going to turn it to one of those. And I will send this to Walter to share the slideshow with you all, because we put a section in here on how to create your focus question for a clearness committee, but we don't have time for that now. So we're just going to now it's your turn, mini clearness committees. This is the part that Walter said we would teach you something, although I imagine many of you have already participated. So we're going to give you an opportunity to experience what it's like to be held in deep questions in a community in a really short period of time. So these, in our actual workshops, we do these for a much longer period of time. So the goal of these clearness committees are to help provide the participants, not necessarily with answers, unfortunately, but to provide them with deeper questions that they can use to help bring them to clarity. And especially in this format, I don't expect you to have an aha moment, but it's to support other people in their discernment, as well as to receive questions you may not have thought of before. So we're going to put you in small groups of 3 people. There might be 4. We'll see what Matt can make magic happen. So this is a modified version of a clearness committee, and this is a smaller version than even what Greg and I do. So you'll decide who goes first, and that person's going to be called the spotlight person. And you'll appoint someone as the scribe to take notes during that process, and someone else to keep time. We'll also be prompting you. So there's 3 people in your group. You can divide those roles up. Each person will take turns being the focus person or the spotlight person. And the person who's taking notes should just, communicate sort of how you want to share those with the spotlight person. So the spotlight person, for up to 2 minutes, will share what is on their heart and their mind as they're thinking about their vocation. And you might consider the query, how is vocation? Is it sitting with you? The query we wrote. How does vocation sit with you? You can take a minute in silence and get started, and then you'll have your 2 minutes to speak into the group. And while that person is talking, the other 2 members of the group will be actively listening. Then we'll prompt you again. After that 2 minutes is up, you'll have 3 minutes. So at the beginning of that 3 minutes, the other 2 people in the group can ask clarifying questions like, wait, what did you say here? Or can you clarify what this role was? Or if you need to, and then spend the rest of the time asking questions that help them go deeper. So you want to think about what questions might open new ways forward for them. What questions might be, rising for you as you think about your own inner teacher. And then that'll be just 3 minutes, and the scribe will write down the questions. And the person who is the spotlight person won't respond to those deeper questions. They can respond to the clarifying questions, but just listen to the deeper questions. And make sure that the scribe writes those questions down in full. And then at the end of that practice, so after the end of the 3 minutes, we'll prompt you and you'll switch. So you'll do this 3 times. So each person's the spotlight person and gets a chance to share, and then the others ask them deepening questions. And then at the end of that practice, you can talk about what it was like for you. And you'll have, so that'll be 15 minutes of your time. You'll be in these groups for 30 minutes, I think. Is that right? I'm going to say that that's right. You'll be in these groups for 30 minutes. And at the end of that 15-minute time, for the next portion of your group, you'll have a moment to craft together sort of either a query or a comment about sort of what your experience was of that or the presentation. So these instructions, pared down to be very specific about what you should do, are going in the chat. And I think they're in the chat now. Yep, they're in the chat now. So you shall take those with you to your groups. I believe there will be a timer in the upper right-hand corner for you to help you keep time, but we'll also prompt you with broadcast messages. I hope you enjoy your experience of deepening with others.
Are all closed.
So welcome back, friends. I hope you had I trust that you had a generative conversation. So each group was supposed to invite somebody to be the recorder and to put your questions or responses in the chat. And I'd like to invite you to do that now. And I'll give you a minute or so to do that. And we'll hold the scribes for a moment. And then Jen and Greg will move forward. Okay. Jen and Greg, you have anything that you wanted to say, or shall we look at these questions?
I think let's look at these questions. We also covet your feedback. And so the more we hear what is rising for you and what we've shared and other thoughts and ideas you have, we'd love to hear those too.
Leslie, I'd like to invite you to unmute and read your question if you'd be willing to do that.
Sure. And I say this with full disclosure that I inadvertently returned to the whole room a little early while we were still discussing this because we ran out of time. But my question is, what are the sources of misalignment between the objectives we want to achieve within our vocation and our ability to realize them? And I was in a group with Pamela Williams and Denise Allison.
Jen or Greg?
I'm wondering if your group is willing to share more about the conversation around that question.
One of the questions that came up is, we all work with students. And one of the questions that came up for both Pamela and Denise, I think, is, what support is available to them and to us for helping students realize their vocation, and especially moving beyond familial expectations for those students, particularly when they are new to the United States. Am I representing that fairly, Pamela and Denise? And you want to build on that?
Yes, you represented that. Yes. And one of the aspects of that is also the trajectory. Denise brought this really prominently, but the expectations that come not only from oneself and one's family, but the cultural expectations of choosing a vocation that elevates that you have come not only for yourself, but for your family, and for some students for their country. And how that, alignment is known, supported, and also what that raises for those of us who are also trying to show the espoused values of our educational organization and what surrounds it.
I think I can just speak about this for a little bit. I think this is a really important noticing about the student constituents that you have. And at least I think that one support for them is providing spaces to talk about it, and to talk with people to speak with other students who have families that share the same cultural assumptions. I'll give an example just from my own life, for what it's worth, that because this is just, I can only speak from my own experience, but I was raised an evangelical Christian with a church that didn't believe that women should be ordained. I consider my current work ministry, but being in supportive environments with other female students in undergrad and in grad school who would talk about what it's like to not only pursue or feel some call to sort of a professional religious work, and also understand the difficulties of being in a familial and cultural situation where that's not accepted, and that's not valued, and that's actually problematic in some ways. And I think, at least for me, being able to speak with other people who understood that cultural background is useful, and then helping navigate, well, what are my right next steps given this situation that I'm in? And so I imagine that it's useful for other people from different cultures, different countries, to talk with other students who have similar experiences, to talk about well, I have these pressures. These are what my map looks like. Here are where my barriers are. Here are the assumptions that are going into how I then make these decisions, and providing them with support that meets them on their own values. Because I think that the outcomes of that are going to look different than what they look like for me. But that's Greg, do you have other things to share?
No, I don't.
I'd just like to add that one of the things that thank you for that reflection, Jen. One of the things that came up repeatedly for us, as you warned, early in your presentation, is just the dominance of finances and needing to, meet basic needs or not so basic needs. And the pressure that people may feel, for example, to send money back home and to compromise to not listen so much to their inner light, because they feel the pressure to support their families. And that's a really rough one.
I wonder if we might invite Elizabeth to make a comment, because it seems that her question is also in this area. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think all three of us noticed the tension or the conflict, I don't really want to say conflict, between realizing our inner vocation or our individual vocation and those outer constraints that we meet, whether it's taking a job where it gives you adequate insurance, right, for a health condition, or whether it's advising students to tread the same rocky path that we've trodden, or, you know, it's a very, I don't know, we all seem to have the same kind of underlying question. No real response to that previous one, but a very similar kind of a thing, I think, right?
I think for me, I have been in my own discernment about what I am called to do vocationally. And I just transition out of working full time for Quakers. That has been my only full-time career since graduating college. Is I've been working for a series of Quaker organizations besides going to grad school. But my whole entire working life was full-time jobs at Quaker colleges, non-profits, a Quaker meeting. And I loved the work, but it wasn't sustainable on so many levels. So I went into a new career field in technology to pursue my vocation of doing this work, because I knew that technology for myself was something I kind of have a passion for, but it wouldn't take over my life like ministry. And it will ultimately probably pay me more than working for Quakers would ever do. So I think vocation, and Jen, I make this clear, vocation isn't necessarily what you get paid to do.
Yeah.
And vocation, and we don't believe that everyone will just have one vocation for all of their lives. So that is, so yeah, I think the tension is there. I don't want to diminish it, but I also want to say that vocation doesn't necessarily mean what you do for pay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Kati, are you still there? You were wanting to bring in sort of the other stages in life question. Would you be willing to share your question?
Yeah, I don't know that we were able to formulate it as a question, but just that this process spoke quite a bit to us, thinking about our own personal transitions that we were part of. And I guess one question that came up was about how much we tied vocation to paid work and what did that mean for retirement. So maybe that fits into the discussion that we're talking about here. And then I guess I also just have a little question about what we were just talking about, is that are we talking about failure, right? That one may have a vocation at which one is in fact not accomplishing as much as one would like. Maybe that, one is struggling, one has a vision, one is doing, it's engaged in that vision, but it is not bearing fruit, and because of institutional or social constraints. And what do we do with that?
Anybody want to tackle those challenging questions? They're really good ones.
Overall, this is a question I've had for many years. Is in Quakerism we talk about feeling called to ministry or feeling, but what happens when that call for ministry for a particular project is completed or needed to lay down? What does that project look like? And how can that be? What is the process for laying it down with intention and gracefully, and not being a sign of defeat or beating ourselves up, but a sign of God or the inner light has given us and taken us this far. So, and now we need to lay this down and move on.
Jen, would you like to make some last comments and then we'll close?
Sure. Just one thing I'm thinking about as I reflect on these questions, which I think they're really powerful ones, is that students are holding these questions too. And I think like they're exploring the tension. And I really think I don't have the answers for them about how they hold their own tension between the familial like cultural duties or the structural societal situations they find themselves in. And everybody's sort of unique in that. What I want is to provide them with community to support them in discerning what their way forward is, and tools to hold those ongoing tensions which will continue to surface for them while they're in school and outside of it. So I think I think about some of these questions and turn them around to like, how can I support these people or these students in their discernment of these tensions for themselves? And it gives me a slightly different set of then resources. And I do this in my job at the Friends House a lot too, is we have an intergenerational community and everybody has their own specific circumstances. But what are the ways that I can provide really deep listening and abide with them and partner with them in figuring out what their right steps are? And I think that our world will continue to shift in ways we can't predict and continue to resurface new tensions. And the job market will continue to change and things will look different. And so what are the tools we can equip people with now so that they can feel supported and confident in themselves as they navigate how they move forward? And if they have to make a decision about, or if they make a decision like Greg, that's like, here's how I'm going to make my money and here's how I'm going to feel fulfilled, or, I'm going to take less pay and work for an organization like this, or I'm going to, deal with my family not really supporting me in the work that I do, but which is my situation, but I still am doing it. And so how can they have the tools and the support they need and the networks of support they need to continue to make those changes or take those steps?
Pamela, unfortunately, I think we're coming to an end. And those who can stay for a moment afterwards, we can have a little bit more conversation and Paul can read his query. But I think it's time for us to close officially so that people can leave if they need to. Jen, there's some information you want to share.
Yeah, I'm just going to put into the chat my email, Greg's email, and the Friends House website. If folks would like to connect with us, I think Greg and I are traveling, ideally, depending on the COVID situation, to colleges and universities. And we were eager to work on this with students and with you. If you have additional feedback for us, you can send that to our emails, or you have resources or things you want to show us. And Walter is also going to send this information out and the slideshow to you with the recording in a few days.
And we would like to announce that we have a working title, a definite program for February. And let me see if I have it here. The working title is Working Towards Hospitality in the Classroom, Inclusion and Universal Design. We're very excited about that topic. And also the Executive Committee of FAHE is happy to announce that we are going to have our June conference virtually again. And it's going to be on the theme of Quakers and racial justice. It's going to be June 14th to 17th. It may be, and it's going to be virtual, and we look forward to people joining us then. And I want to thank Jen, and I want to thank Greg, mostly for the work that you've done in the world with students and preparing, the work that you have done to support folks, but that you've also decided to share a little bit of your time with us here. And so I'm gonna close tonight, and if people can stay to ask some last questions, I'm sure folks will stay a little bit. Good night, friends. Come back again.